looking at a bit on poll results concerning trust. And if we look at the poll results, we could see that some polls showed that during the first wave of the pandemic, trust in authorities, especially national authorities, rose. However, during the second wave of the pandemic, the trust has decreased in authorities and also in media, and also interpersonal trust. For instance, Eurobarometer and some other polls have shown this. So that was an interesting kind of change, how trust developed or evolved between the two waves of the pandemic. And I was interested in how like trust changed in recent times, in decades. Like to put the change of trust during the pandemic in a bit of context. And I've seen, we've done a major research in 2015 on trust within Europe. And I saw that, that there is a kind of gradual decline of trust, which has been going on for decades actually in Europe. And we could see, or we can see that, like, for instance, the proportion of those who tend to trust national parliaments has decreased in all of the EU member states, in the old EU member states, in the last 2 or 3 decades. So it's actually been going on for a longer time. And of course, after the economic crisis 28-29, we could see a sharp decline of trust in most of the countries, and especially, of course, in those countries that were hit hardest by that crisis. And I think in terms of the pandemic, it's important that we're speaking about a crisis-like situation. So an unusual and almost unprecedented situation. And I think many may have the impression nowadays that such kind of situation have become more frequent, and probably also like their numbers have increased. If you think of, like, for instance, the geopolitical crises, like the Crimean crisis, or the war in Donbass, or like the crisis in the Middle East. But if we can also think of the economic crisis, which I just mentioned, or like the whole issue of global warming. We had 2015 migration situation, some call it migration crisis. So there are a lot of situations. There have been a lot of situations, I think, in recent years, decades, which not only affected our lives, but also which had a very significant impact on the outlook of people, or on the vision of people, how they look into the future, what they expect from the future. And to close, also I looked at the socio-demographic indicators which explain trust, or of which we think that they would explain trust in general. And I could see that the socio-demographic indicators actually hardly explain trust. It's probably the only one factor which has an impact on trust is the level of education. So the higher the education, the higher the trust in authorities, and also in the interpersonal trust. But I think what is more important than the socio-demographic indicators and also the education are the subjective and the objection of the feeling of how well I am, and also like how satisfied I am with life, and also the objective well-being of my living standards. So the more satisfied I am with life, and the higher living standards I have, the more I tend to trust, or the more trust I tend to have. And also another factor which impacts actually the level of trust is the social embeddedness. So the broader social network I am embedded in, and the more support and the more help I get, for instance, from my fellow citizens, from my neighbors, from my family, the more trust I tend to have in other individuals.
In your opinion, what are some factors that have affected our level of trust in each other and in our leaders, and maybe even in democracy as an institution during this pandemic?
I think it's very important here, what I mentioned before, that this pandemic It's probably the first time since the Second World War that every dimension of our life has been affected that significantly and negatively on a global scale. So probably like most of the human beings on the earth have been very much affected from the last 1.5 to 2 years. And all of the dimensions of our life, like the private life, our social life, our health, of course, also our work situation, our financial possibilities, but also our public life. So in terms of each dimensions, it was a very, for most of us, I think it was a very negative time, this pandemic. And I think what has, like, uncertainty and insecurity have been probably the kind of the two main feelings that most of us have had in the last couple of years. And this is probably kind of an answer to the question Heather raised, like, what are we expecting from our leaders? And I think in times of such crisis like this pandemic, I think certainty and security have become the most important goals of people, or the most valuable goods that people can think of nowadays. And that, I think, very much affects like how we see or what we expect from politicians, and also how we trust our politicians, or which politicians or which authorities we trust the most nowadays. I think which was also very important is that during the pandemic, I think we have kind of lost our compasses or lighthouses, like all the kind of authorities which we tend to believe in, like science, national authorities or international authorities, or media outlets. They actually were all in the same struggle. They all looked for answers, and any of them could provide us with the objective truth, because we knew so little of the pandemic. So there were so many questions, because there was the virus was very new thing. We didn't know about almost anything about the origin of the virus, about the basic characteristics of the virus, how it spread, what the symptoms are, and so on and so forth. So it was a very new situation to all of us, and there were hardly any actors who could kind of show us, like show citizens, the direction where we should go. It was like probably for many of us, it was a feeling of a social experiment where different governments try different things and wanted to see which works better, which works less. And also, I think it was important that it was a very fast changing situation. Like information changed sometimes from one day to another day. There were new findings coming up, which might be or might have been contradictory to findings from yesterday. So the whole situation was very unstable. I think a good example is the news from the other day that the new U.S. president raised the question again where the virus actually originated from, whether it developed naturally or it leaked from a Chinese lab. And we can remember that a year ago, approximately a year ago, this question was answered, that the virus developed naturally, and also Facebook kind of banned from that on. Facebook banned all the news which said that it kind of spread from a Chinese lab. And now Facebook announced that it again would allow all kind of news which say that the virus originated from a lab. So I think it's really a good example to show how unstable the whole situation is, and how information has changed from one day to another very quickly. And I think it's also raised serious questions about the role and responsibility of the mainstream media. There were a lot of situations where I think also we as readers, but also media workers could ask or think of where are the boundaries between providing information, creating confusion, or even creating hysteria. Like if the information changes so rapidly and there are contradicting information from one day to another, you can ask yourself as a media worker, what actually should you publish? For what information should you give publicity? And this leads to my, I think, last point is the role of disinformation. During the pandemic, we have seen a huge wave of disinformation, especially, of course, on social media channels. And a big chunk of this disinformation was intentionally spread by states, for instance, or by politicians, political actors, but also by opportunist business actors who just wanted to earn more money with the pandemic. But also a lot of information, false information, was spread unintentionally by people who wanted to spread information in goodwill, but these might have turned out to be false information. And this pandemic showed that false information, disinformation poses a serious risk, not only, of course, to trust, but also to health issues. So, for instance, who rejects vaccination or who doesn't believe in the coronavirus may suffer serious illness or may even be dead. And I refer to the GlobSec Trends 2020 data, which was conducted in 2020 in 9 CE countries and Western Balkan countries. And the polls showed that 1/3 of the citizens of these 9 countries believe in conspiracy theories related to the COVID-19. So it's a significant amount of people who believe in conspiracy theories related to the virus. And the risk of believing conspiracy theories related to the coronavirus is that this kind of conspiracy theories might open the door for other conspiracy theories. And once you are kind of fall in the trap of conspiracy theories, it's very hard to dismantle or debunk these conspiracy theories. So actually, the task is to prevent these conspiracy theories to spread, or prevent people to believe in conspiracy theories, and debunk these theories before they spread.